In a stunning twist that left the British aristocracy in silent shock, Sarah Ferguson, once Duchess, always controversial, was blocked from entering Windsor Chapel just 6 minutes before the service. No warning, no explanation, and no turning back. But the shock wasn't just in the act, it was in the identity of the woman who orchestrated it, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. What happened in those last 6 minutes changed everything. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Sarah Ferguson arrived that morning with the confidence of someone who believed she still belonged. For years she had hovered on the edges of royal acceptance, never fully restored, never fully banished. She stepped forward, prepared for duty, dressed with deliberate restraint, determined to project dignity rather than defiance. The chapel service was not merely ceremonial, it was symbolic, a sacred gathering that whispered continuity, loyalty, unity. And Sarah intended to stand within that unity, not outside it. But something shifted the moment she approached the entrance. A pause too long, a glance exchanged between security officers. Radios crackled with low urgency. It was subtle at first, the kind of tension only seasoned palace staff could sense. Then the words came through the line. Calm yet unmistakably final, do not permit entry. Instruction from the Duchess of Edinburgh. The air thickened. Even those trained to suppress emotion felt the weight of that directive. Royal staff were trapped between protocol and power. Some had known Sarah for decades. They remembered her laughter echoing through palace corridors, her scandals splashed across front pages, her long, complicated road back into partial grace. Yet none of that mattered in the face of a direct command from Sophie. The Duchess of Edinburgh, steady and disciplined, was not known for theatrical gestures. If she had issued this order, it had not been done lightly. Sarah's expression shifted from polite expectation to disbelief. She asked once, calmly, for clarification, then again, more firmly. The answer did not change, the instructions stood. Behind her, whispers spread like wildfire through velvet-lined corridors of tradition. Guests pretended not to stare, but they stared. A collective gasp rippled as realization dawned. This was not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. For a moment that felt eternal, Sarah stood suspended between past and present. She had survived public disgrace, financial ruin, exile from inner circles. She had endured ridicule and clawed her way back into limited acceptance. But this was different. This was rejection, not from the tabloids, not from public opinion, but from within the family itself. And not just any member of that family, Sophie, the quiet loyalist, the woman once described as the monarchy's steady heartbeat. Then it happened. The chapel doors closed, not slammed, not forced, simply closed with the cold finality of tradition protecting itself. The service would proceed, the hymns would rise, the prayers would be spoken, and Sarah Ferguson would not be inside. 6 minutes earlier, she had been part of the royal narrative. 6 minutes later, she was standing outside its sacred threshold, confronted by the unmistakable message that her presence was no longer guaranteed. The humiliation was private, yet it felt seismic. And as the bells began to toll within those ancient walls, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was not chaos. This was calculation. This was not emotions spiraling out of control. This was strategy unfolding at precisely the chosen moment. But this wasn't an impulsive decision, it was the explosive result of decades of royal tension, sealed betrayals, and a final move by a duchess who had stayed silent. Until now, behind palace smiles and carefully choreographed photo ops lies a buried battlefield. Sophie and Sarah, two duchesses on opposite ends of the monarchy's moral spectrum, have never truly reconciled. For years they navigated around each other with icy precision, but something cracked, and the detonation began long before the chapel doors ever closed. In the early days of their royal lives, their paths could not have been more different. Sophie, once a public relations professional, entered the royal family with grace, discipline, and a quiet determination to serve rather than shine. Her loyalty to Queen Elizabeth II was unwavering, her reputation unblemished, her place slowly cemented through trust. not theatrics. In contrast, Sarah Ferguson arrived like a firestorm, fiery-haired, unapologetically loud, and destined to become the palace's most scandal-prone figure. The tabloids devoured her missteps, and the monarchy recoiled from the chaos she carried with her. What began as a clash of styles soon hardened into a conflict of values. Sophie, the quiet shield of the crown. Sarah, the fallen figure who never quite stood up again. The late Queen saw he divide early on. She trusted Sophie with ceremonial responsibilities and inner circle access that Sarah never regained, even after years of effort. Invitations to Windsor, Balmoral and state banquets arrived in Sophie's name consistently. For Sarah, the pattern was cruelly familiar: appear, then disappear. Attend, then vanish. Her name missing from lists where others saw theirs printed in gold. It wasn't always overt. Sometimes the omission itself was the message. Within the palace walls, the tension was palpable. Staff whispered it for years. They never shared a room without tension. Moments of forced civility were captured in photographs, but the smiles cracked when the flashes faded. Sophie, ever composed, bore the strain with an air of polite detachment. But behind the scenes, she felt the weight. Fergie's presence at major events, whether quietly invited or loudly announced, cast a disruptive shadow over the carefully managed image the royal family clung to, especially after the Queen's passing. Sophie resented the distraction. She resented the history Sarah dragged behind her like an untamed storm. Yet Sophie never said a word publicly. She didn't need to. Her power was in silence, in the way she positioned herself closer and closer to the monarch's ear, first the Queen's, and now Charles's. For every tabloid Sarah survived, Sophie gained another measure of quiet influence. And then, slowly, the resentment became strategy. While Sarah fought for visibility, Sophie became invisible in the most powerful of ways, working behind the scenes, building alliances, and waiting for a moment when silence would speak louder than scandal. The Windsor Chapel decision was not born in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of royal frost accumulating between two women who represented opposing faces of duty. Sophie, the emblem of discretion; Sarah, the echo of controversy; and the crown, ever concerned with image, chose which one it could afford to stand beside in sacred spaces. When the door was closed on Sarah that day, it wasn't just a matter of protocol. It was the execution of a long-held judgment. But to understand the moment of public rejection, we must go back to the private betrayal that Sophie never forgave and that Sarah never saw coming. There was a dinner, unrecorded in official schedules, where a careless whisper rewrote royal loyalties forever. Sarah Ferguson, emboldened and unfiltered, made a remark so personal, so cutting, that Sophie, normally composed, left the room in silent fury. What was said that night became the seed of a vendetta. It was meant to be an intimate gathering, no cameras, no press, just select senior royals and their spouses retreating briefly from public glare following the coronation whirlwind. The setting was deceptively serene, but beneath the silver and crystal lay currents of tension. For Sarah, it was a rare re-entry into proximity with power. She had grown bolder over the years, her exile softening into tolerated presence. But tolerance does not mean acceptance, and certainly not trust. That night, as wine flowed and titles were spoken like currency, Sarah made a fatal mistake. In a moment of careless jest masked as humor, she spoke of Sophie loud enough to be heard, sharp enough to wound. She's not royal, she's a placeholder. If not for Edward, she'd be invisible. The words fell like broken glass. What Sarah hadn't noticed was that Sophie was just steps away, having returned early from a brief absence. She heard every syllable, and for once, Sophie did not wait. She didn't confront, she didn't defend. She turned, quietly, and exited with a face as pale as the marble floor beneath her. It was Princess Anne who found her silent in the corridor, tears restrained but visible, breathing through betrayal not of policy or tradition, but of personal dignity. Anne, ever blunt, simply said, "She's never known where the line is, but you have." And with that, the moment passed, but it would never be forgotten. Back in London, nothing changed publicly. Sophie still attended royal functions with grace. She still stood beside Edward, curtsied, nodded, smiled, but the shift had already begun. Behind the scenes, something had fractured. Those closest to her noticed. She cancelled 2 private charity engagements without explanation. She declined a weekend stay at Balmoral, citing personal reasons. And when her senior aide asked directly what was wrong, Sophie finally answered with chilling clarity, "Some things cannot be forgotten, and some debts must be paid in silence." It was no longer about rivalry. It was about respect. Sophie had earned hers through years of consistency. Sarah had squandered hers in seconds. That dinner became the quiet turning point. Sophie, once always reactive, now became calculating. She stopped attending events where Sarah might be present. She began having closed-door meetings with senior palace advisors. She moved strategically, no longer out of loyalty alone but out of purpose. What began as humiliation had evolved into intention. Sarah, unaware of the storms he'd unleashed, continued attending events, offering smiles and rehearsed contrition. But the energy in rooms shifted, invitations slowed, conversations shortened, and behind every corner there was a presence watching not to forgive, but to remember. Sophie was done waiting. She wasn't the outsider anymore. She was becoming the gatekeeper. But Sophie wasn't the only one watching. High-ranking royals began choosing sides, and the whispers reached King Charles himself, setting the stage for a deeper fracture. What if the woman once married into royalty is now viewed as a national risk? King Charles's private briefings began painting a troubling portrait of Sarah Ferguson associations, debts and interviews that walked a thin line between candor and scandal. Sophie saw the red flags. Charles began to listen. Sarah Ferguson's re-emergence into the royal periphery had not gone unnoticed, but what troubled the palace wasn't her presence. It was her persistence. The media, long her confidant and curse, had welcomed her return with open arms. She embraced the attention, offering commentaries on family, monarchy and legacy with an air of informal boldness that unsettled the rigid order of royal communication. And while the public may have seen a redeemed duchess sharing her voice, the institution saw something far more dangerous: unpredictability. Unfiltered words are no small matter when they come from someone still bearing the royal imprint, no matter how faint. It was during one of Charles's confidential morning briefings that the first formal concern surfaced: an upcoming memoir. An advisor described it as free-flowing, emotional, and unrestricted by counsel. There were no guarantees of restraint, no promises that sacred boundaries wouldn't be crossed. Sources close to the publisher hinted at raw revelations, some about life behind palace walls, others that could inadvertently touch on current power structures. For a monarchy delicately balancing modern transparency with ancient discretion, this was a match too close to the powder keg. And then came Sophie, not loud, not reactionary, but precise. She had watched Sarah maneuver through headlines, soften her scandals into soundbites, and inch closer to events that required discretion and honor, not spectacle. Sophie assembled her concerns quietly, methodically. A dossier landed on Charles's desk, its title chilling in its clarity, A Threat from Within. Inside, a collection of public remarks, private correspondences and staff testimonies, patterns of inconsistency, strategic oversharing, repeated behavior that, if ignored, could undermine royal unity in a time of fragile public confidence. Charles hesitated. Old affections and shared history made any decision heavy. But the weight of duty is not measured in sentiment, it is measured in stability. As the king read through the document, his inner circle fractured. Some believed Sarah had paid for her mistakes long ago. Others, including the Queen Consort's closest aides, privately admitted concern. Even Camilla, often non-committal, reportedly told a senior aide, "She's a reminder of what happens when the gates stay open too wide." And so, a quiet decision was made. Not declared, not announced, but executed with surgical precision. Sarah's name, once included in the tentative list for the Windsor Chapel service, was removed. Not by accident, not by oversight, but by order. The chapel was no longer just a place of worship, it was a fortress of trust. And Sarah, however charming she had become to the public, was no longer considered secure within its walls. As royal forces rallied in private, Sarah remained unaware, until a single moment in a single room shattered any illusion of acceptance. Blocked at the chapel, Sarah doesn't leave quietly. She demands clarity, storms the outer chambers of Windsor, and faces Sophie Wessex herself, only to receive the most devastating response: silence. The confrontation didn't end in words. It ended in a look that said, "You're no longer one of us." The moment the doors closed, Sarah's instincts exploded. She refused to be humiliated in silence, escorted hastily to a side corridor by staff, attempting to prevent a scene. Her calm unraveled. Her voice trembled, not with confusion but rage. "What is going on?" she snapped, eyes blazing with disbelief. But the staff offered no answers, just sympathetic glances and gentle redirection. That's when Sarah made her move. She demanded an audience with the person she now knew was behind it all. "Get me Sophie, now!" Her voice echoed through stone halls meant for prayers, not battles, and Sophie came. Not alone, but with 2 members of royal security flanking her, neither a threat nor an escort, but a statement. Sarah stepped forward, but Sophie didn't budge. The air between them was colder than the Windsor wind. "You did this," Sarah said, voice cracking under the weight of public humiliation and personal betrayal. Sophie said nothing, not a word. She simply met Sarah's gaze with an eerie stillness that made her meaning deafeningly clear. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to explain. She had already spoken through action. But there was one moment, one line, that cut deeper than anything Sarah had ever endured in the public arena. It was a whisper, meant only for her, but confirmed later by a palace staffer who happened to overhear it. Sophie leaned in ever so slightly and said, "You chose the press over the crown." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Sarah in stunned silence that quickly crumbled into desperate sobs. In one final bid to reclaim some dignity, or at least clarity, Sarah pleaded to see Charles. She believed he would offer her the benefit of the doubt, perhaps even override the decision. But her request was denied, not delayed, not reconsidered, denied. A footman returned with the message, "His Majesty is unavailable," and in that moment Sarah Ferguson finally understood. This wasn't a scheduling conflict, it was a wall, built by trust, loyalty, and years of whispered warnings that had finally erupted into open action. For bystanders who witnessed the confrontation, it wasn't just about chapel access. It wasn't about a list or a mistake. As one royal insider later put it wasn't just exclusion, it was exile, the kind that doesn't come with a headline, but with a lifetime of silence from the only place that ever made you feel like you belonged. Sarah had spent years fighting for scraps of re-entry. In 6 minutes, the doors had closed. In 60 seconds, the final confrontation sealed it. But what pushed Sophie to act now? The answer lies in a hidden chapel archive, a document Fergie never expected to surface. Buried deep in the chapel archives was a little-known clause from Queen Elizabeth II's personal directives, an unwritten rule reserved for exceptional moments of protection. When Sophie found it, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. It was her key to blocking Sarah, legally, publicly, irrevocably. After decades of following palace rules, Sophie found herself in a rare position, granted temporary custodianship over Windsor Chapel logistics during a transitional period between ceremonial staff appointments. On paper, it was administrative. Behind the scenes, it was unprecedented access to authority rarely afforded to anyone outside the monarch or his most senior advisors. Most would have treated the position as symbolic, but Sophie had waited years for a moment to act, and now she had the legal machinery to do it by the book and with a clause the public never even knew existed. Tucked between ceremonial protocols and burial rites, the clause was simple, chilling, and powerful. Entry to the chapel may be denied on grounds of crown integrity. Just 10 words, no fanfare. But it was the handwritten margin notes beside it, penned by Queen Elizabeth herself, that gave it its true weight. The late Queen, ever the guardian of quiet dignity, had underlined one word 3 times in ink that had begun to fade with age: discretion. Not scandal, not headlines, discretion, the weapon of the wise. And Sophie understood immediately what the Queen had intended. When tradition is threatened, silence must defend it. When dignity is in danger, doors must close. She didn't hesitate. Sophie gathered her aides, presented the clause, and moved swiftly. One trusted staffer described the moment as clinical, not emotional. The Duchess gave precise instructio. NS, confirm the clause, activate the chapel authority, and strike one name from the guest protocol. By dawn, Sarah Ferguson's name had been quietly removed from the final attendance list for the Windsor service. No red line, no announcement, just absence. It wasn't enough to bar someone. It had to be done with the authority of the Crown, not vengeance, but structure. Sophie wanted no whispers of a personal vendetta. This was a matter of order, of legacy, of integrity. Once the paperwork was complete, the file was forwarded indirectly to King Charles. His reply wasn't verbal, nor written in ink. It came through silence, the kind of silence that only confirms consent. No override, no questions, no protest. In palace terms, that was as loud as a command. The decision was sealed, not with fury, but with calculated calm. The message was simple. There is a line, and Sarah had crossed it one too many times. And so, as preparations were finalized and seating was rearranged, the final defense of the Crown was not made with swords or scandal, but with a single missing name, upheld by a forgotten clause. The Queen had left behind many legacies, but this one had been waiting for its moment. And now it had been used. But just as Sophie locked Sarah out, an unexpected voice rose up to challenge her authority, one she didn't anticipate. That voice came not from a monarch, nor a seasoned royal counsellor, but from a daughter. Princess Beatrice, Sarah Ferguson's firstborn, had always balanced the impossible tightrope between loyalty to her mother and allegiance to the monarchy. For years, she had navigated palace life with careful diplomacy, refusing to let her mother's turbulent past stain her own standing. But when word reached her that Sarah had been turned away from Windsor, silently, officially, and without recourse, something snapped. The daughter in her surged forward, and she wasn't going to remain quiet. Beatrice arrived at Windsor within hours. No formal announcement, no schedule, just presence. She moved through the corridors not as a princess, but as a woman whose mother had just been humiliated. Her request for a meeting with Sophie was not a plea, it was a demand, and palace protocol, still unsure of how to respond, granted it. The room they met in was small, guarded, and brimming with the kind of tension that could silence centuries of tradition. It was not royal decorum that filled the space, it was heartbreak. Beatrice didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply said, "You've made a spectacle out of someone who has already been punished enough." Sophie stood firm. She spoke only once. This was not punishment. This was preservation. But for Beatrice, that wasn't enough. She spoke of dignity, of forgiveness, of how much her mother had tried to return to royal life with grace. Sophie listened, but her face, usually soft, was stone. And how many times must the Crown gamble on redemption before it breaks? The conversation lasted only minutes, but when Beatrice left, her eyes were red. She passed staff in the hallway without a word, and Sophie, behind that closed door, remained still. No triumph, no relief, just a quiet awareness that something irreversible had unfolded. For the first time, Sophie questioned if the cost of protecting the institution had come at the expense of something more human. The Crown had been preserved. But had a bond just been shattered? The palace offered no comment. Beatrice returned home and cancelled her next public engagement. Sarah, for her part, withdrew from the press. She made no statements, posted no photos. Silence, for once, surrounded her. But inside Windsor, the consequences of Sophie's choice were being felt in ways she hadn't anticipated. A line had been drawn, yes, but it had also divided more than it had protected. And yet, the machinery of monarchy never stops. While emotions simmered and loyalties shifted, A new directive began taking shape, one not rooted in confrontation, but in quiet removal. Because even as Beatrice tried to plead her mother's case, the Crown was preparing for something final, the revocation of Sarah Ferguson's privileges behind closed doors with no appeal. As news spread, Princess Beatrice raced to Windsor. Her mother, humiliated. Her family, on the edge of disgrace. She confronted Sophie not with anger, but with desperation. Could a daughter's plea move a royal wall of ice? Or had Sophie crossed a line from duty into vengeance? Photographers caught the moment she arrived. No smiles, no ceremonial grace, just urgency written across her face. Beatrice didn't come as a royal performing protocol. She came as a Utah, unwilling to let history rewrite itself while she stood still. Whispers ran through the chapel corridors as staff scrambled to escort her through back passageways, shielding the confrontation from the press, but not from palace memory. Behind a closed door in a quiet chapel chamber, two women, each burdened by loyalty to different parts of the same fractured family, faced each other in silence that said more than words ever could. Beatrice's voice was low, but it cracked with restrained pain. "She's my mother. You've made a spectacle." The accusation wasn't venomous, it was wounded, raw. She didn't defend every mistake Sarah had ever made. She didn't deny the controversies, the headlines, or the trouble that had followed her mother like a shadow. But she also refused to let the woman who raised her be erased from a place she once called home, without at least being heard. Sophie, for a moment, stood rigid, unflinching in her resolve. But even fortresses have their cracks, and Beatrice found hers. Sophie's voice, when it came, wasn't cold, it was trembling. And she made a mockery of us. There was no rage behind it, only exhaustion, a lifetime of cleaning what others had dirtied, of watching the institution bend, stretch, and forgive until it finally reached its limit. The two women didn't argue further. There was nothing left to prove. But something happened in that room that no one expected. Both women left in tears, one mourning a mother's dignity, the other mourning the peace she had broken to protect a crown. Palace aides later admitted they had never seen Sophie look so conflicted. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she had gone too far. Had she protected tradition, or hardened into something unrecognizable in the process? The lines between loyalty and punishment had blurred. And in trying to shield the monarchy from disgrace, Sophie had perhaps inflicted a different kind of wound, one the crown itself could not easily explain away. But there was no time to reflect, no moment to pause. The machine of monarchy moved on, and Sophie's hesitation meant little to the institution that had long prepared for moments like this. The next step was already in motion, silent, final, and this time it wouldn't come from Sophie's hand. But even as emotions swirled, the royal family wasn't done. A final act of retribution was still to come this time, not from Sophie, but from the very institution Sarah once betrayed. The chapel block was just the beginning. Within 24 hours, Sarah Ferguson's honorary privileges were rescinded, her royal car access revoked, her palace invitations withdrawn. The monarchy had drawn its line in stone, and the woman once called Fergie was now something far more dangerous, irrelevant. The command was swift, silent, and absolute. While the public reeled from the shock of her exclusion at Windsor, the palace had already begun the quiet execution of a far more brutal verdict. Behind closed doors, the royal household initiated an internal sweep of access logs and protocol registries. One by one, Sarah's digital fingerprints were erased. Her security badge? Deactivated. Her permissions for event attendance? Revoked. Her name, long lingering on ceremonial guest lists as a courtesy more than a right, was deleted in real time. The message wasn't screamed, it was whispered through the systematic stripping of presence. The monarchy wasn't reacting, it was resolving. At the center of the storm stood King Charles. He did not issue a public decree. He didn't need to. All it took was a single handwritten note, brief, final, unmistakable. This must remain private, but permanent. And with that, Sarah's access to royal life was formally, if unofficially, severed. No more last-minute invitations to Windsor luncheons. No more discreet parking access at Buckingham. No more silent nods from aides who had once known her as family. The palace had redefined her status not as disgraced, but erased. Sarah, blindsided and bruised, did what she had learned to do in times of crisis. She vanished. A scheduled appearance in Scotland was quietly cancelled. Her spokesperson issued a vague statement citing personal reflection. But the truth was already out. She hadn't stepped away. She had been pushed. And as headlines began to swirl, the public narrative shifted once again from embarrassment to exile. Commentators speculated on what had sparked the dramatic reversal. Was it Sophie's dossier? Was it Beatrice's confrontation? Or had Sarah, by years of pushing boundaries, simply run out of grace? Within media circles, whispers emerged of a brewing Cold War between the House of Windsor and the remnants of the House of York. Some dubbed it a silent civil war. Others called it long overdue housekeeping. But whatever the interpretation, one thing was clear: Sarah was no longer welcome, and the gates were locked. And through it all, Sophie remained silent. She issued no comment, made no appearances. She understood something few ever grasped. Sometimes the most powerful act is saying nothing at all. The silence itself became the monarchy's loudest message. It wasn't a rebuke, it was a closing chapter. Yet the silence was broken not by Sophie, not by Sarah, but by a voice from the past. One final twist, one final reckoning. In a moment of poetic irony, a letter from Queen Elizabeth II, kept sealed, since her passing, surfaced within the Windsor archives. Addressed to both Sophie and Sarah, it revealed her private thoughts on forgiveness, duty, and the burdens of being both royal and human. And in her words, a final truth neither Duchess was ready to confront. The envelope, found among a collection of personal notes tucked away in the Queen's private vault at Windsor, was marked with 6 haunting words, to be opened if division arises. It had been untouched for years, protected not by locks, but by timing. And now, with the events at the chapel sending shockwaves through the very foundation of royal unity, the moment had come. The seal was broken. Inside, the Queen's handwriting flowed not with command, but with compassion, a voice from the grave, whispering to a family on the edge of fracture. To be royal, she wrote, is to carry pain, not project it. We serve not to strike, but to still the storm. Her words pierced deeper than any punishment or protocol. To Sophie, she offered praise, acknowledging her steadfastness, her unwavering dedication, her quiet sacrifice. But then, like a mother speaking to a favored child at risk of losing herself, the Queen added a warning: loyalty can become cruelty when not tempered with grace. The words hit like a reflection Sophie had avoided confronting until that very moment. To Sarah, she did not offer forgiveness, but she did offer understanding. You made mistakes, but you made the family smile, the Queen wrote. A line that reframed everything. Sarah had been reckless, yes, but she had also brought warmth into a house often starved of it. She had erred publicly, repeatedly, but her intentions, at least in the Queen's eyes, were never malicious. They were human. And the monarchy, Elizabeth insisted, must remember its humanity. The final paragraph was the hardest to read, and perhaps the most enduring. The crown survives not through strength, but through grace. A line that felt less like a statement and more like a challenge to whoever held power next. Would they rule with wisdom, or with wrath, with silence, or with empathy? As the letter made its way through trusted hands, its impact was immediate yet intangible. It didn't reverse decisions or unlock chapel doors, but it forced a pause in a palace that had been charging forward without reflection. For both Sophie and Sarah, and for the institution they had served in vastly different ways, the Queen's voice became a mirror they couldn't look away from. And so, as Windsor's bells fade into memory and the chapel stands still, one question remains: has Sophie's act protected the crown, or fractured it beyond repair? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.